Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the Anchor monthly webinars. Anchor webinars are a production of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma, Norman campus. I am Dr. Jenny Rongo, the Executive Director of the Center and Director of Anchor. I am very delighted to be your host today. Use the chat to tell us where you're joining us from. Let us greet each other that way. For those of us who are joining us for the first time, Anchor offers 2 webinars per month. One on the first Wednesday of the month and the last Wednesday of the month. Please visit our website at anchor.ou.edu for the full list of upcoming webinars and webinars on demand. Our goal is to continue the conversation on how race and ethnicity intersects with issues of social justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, and provide a professional learning space where ideas are exchanged for transformational change in our higher education institutions, community organizations, and others committed to this work. Our next webinar will be held November 17th with Dr. Sheila Merkel from George Mason University. She will be presenting on fostering connection, a relational approach to advocacy. Just a reminder that the call for proposals for Anchor 2022 is open. We would like you to join us in Portland, Oregon, May 31st to June 4th. College students across the country can apply for scholarships. You will be joining thousands of other professionals from the more than 1,200 institutions and organizations from across the country, as well as international attendees from Canada, Asia, Europe, and Africa. ASL and live captioning is available for this broadcast. And please remember to post your questions in the Q&A box and not on the chat. Our panelists today are sisters by blood and sisters in the work of creating meaningful support and change in higher education institutions. I present to you Sheila Higgs Burkhalter, the Vice President for Student Affairs at Winthrop University. She has more than 27 years of higher education experience and has worked in a variety of student affairs areas at both public and private institutions. At Winthrop University, she provides visionary oversight and strategic leadership for a comprehensive university-wide approach to co-curricular learning, retention, and student success. Burkhalter's portfolio includes a division of approximately 100 full-time staff, 300 plus paraprofessionals, and a $2.5 million budget. She's also an accomplished speaker, facilitator, and executive and leadership transitions coach. She has a very long bio. Visit our website to read the complete bio. I want to present to you our very own here at the University of Oklahoma, Belinda Higgs Hyppolite, the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer at OU, all 3 campuses. In her 25-year-long career in higher education, she has served in a variety of leadership roles and responsibilities, starting in student affairs, residential life, student success, Greek life, and multicultural affairs. She has championed the cause for social justice through advocacy for low-income, first-generation, foster care, religious, and non-religious DACA, TPS, and undocumented students. Throughout her career, Dr. Hyppolite has passionately advocated for the voiceless through her work in diversity education and oppression reduction. As a social justice advocate and educator, she believes that access to education is a right, not a privilege. Her bio is very long as well. Please visit our website to read both full bios. Please join me now in welcoming our panelists today, Sheila Higgs Burkhalter and Dr. Belinda Higgs Hyppolite. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Arungu, for that wonderful introduction. I am going to let my sister now share our PowerPoint. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. We are extremely excited to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon. And if you see Sheila and I smile, and we're watching all of the love notes come in through the chat box. And so we're already breaking the rules of engagement right from the beginning. So I will allow my sister Sheila to give a brief introduction of herself, and then we'll jump right into our presentation.
Good afternoon. Because we have more detailed explanations of who we are in our later slides, I won't take much time, but I do want to extend my welcome to you and my thanks to you for joining us this afternoon. We're very excited to have you here. We're very excited to have this opportunity to talk about our journeys, both pre-higher education and in higher education now. So welcome aboard.
So at this time, we would like to begin this presentation with a land acknowledgement. We want to take a moment and pause to acknowledge the original ancestors of this land. I'm currently located in the city of Norman, which is located in the state of Oklahoma, and my sister is joining us from South Carolina. So we invite you to take a moment of silence to personally reflect on how the land was acquired, all of the sacrifices that took place, how families were displaced, so that we can now gather in this space at this time. This land which we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, Osage nations in the state of Oklahoma. And in South Carolina, we honor the Catawba, Waxhaw, and Sugaree nations. We acknowledge that these territories once served as hunting grounds, trade exchange, and migrant routes. We pay respect and homage to the tribal nations, peoples, past, present, and future, and their continued presence in the homeland and throughout the historical diaspora.
Thank you. I enter as one, but I come as 10,000, Maya Angelou. So today we're going to be talking about the following learning outcomes. I won't read them to you because you're capable of doing that, but I will say that we'll be talking about the importance of personal foundations and values in our leadership journey. We'll highlight the importance of defining success on your own terms while advancing your institution's success. We'll also discuss how to build a culture of belonging while supporting the institutional mission and strategic directions. And finally, we'll discuss how to be change makers while helping to shape culture at your institutions. I enter as one, but I come as 10,000. We recognize that our family and community have given us both roots and wings. This has allowed us to soar to where we are today. Our roots are from the intersections of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Missouri. We come from state lines crossed in the darkness of night in search of freedom and a better life. We are from cotton fields and factories. We are from our ancestors being denied an education to education being the catalyst for a full and free life. We were first-generation college students, and now we are first-generation graduates, often navigating uncharted territory. We come from all things are possible to them that believe. We come from hard work and a hustle mentality. We stagger not at the promises of God, and we lean into our deep spiritual foundations and church homes when it keeps us grounded, focused, and centered in a chaotic world. We are from large families. Our mama had 16 siblings, our daddy had 12. From hope personified, from service to community and wisdom. We are from our grandparents, William and Susie Mae Smith, and Willie and Ida Lee Higgs. We are from our father, Harley Higgs, a preacher, a factory worker, a certified automotive technician, a carpenter, and a locksmith. And we are from our mother, Ray Higgs, a first lady, a factory worker, a Head Start teacher, a community advocate, and a councilwoman. And excuse me, I get a little choked up because she's no longer with us. We are sisters to 3 other sisters. Together, we are known as the Higgs sisters. And yes, we do sing. We are wives who are supported by cheerleading husbands who are our partners in life and everything we do, and family members who continually pray for and celebrate our success. We're very involved mothers and fierce advocates for our children. We are the recipients of excellent mentoring, sponsorship, and strong personal relationships. And we now serve in those capacities for others, making sure to lift as we climb. Before I transition to my introduction, I want to check to see if my sister has anything to add to our individual journey.
I think you said it very eloquently, and I don't have anything else to add at this time. Thank you.
Awesome. So my unofficial career in higher education began as a resident assistant at Southeast Missouri State University. It was a great way to pay for school, and that really was my only goal when I started in the role. However, what I really went to school for was to be an anchor woman in a number 4 market. I got my shot in the communication industry in the summer of 1993 when I was still an undergrad. I became a Capitol Hill reporter for the Washington Afro-American newspaper in Washington, D.C. It was supposed to be an internship and turned into a full-fledged job. It was interesting work, and I felt sophisticated as I ran about the city doing the work, but I also got a reality check, one that I did not anticipate. This was not impactful work. This is not what I was looking for. So this led to what I consider to be my first career swerve. I became a hall director and assistant coordinator for multicultural affairs at Millikan University right after graduating from undergrad. I was hired by the Residence Life team, but I was mentored by Jan DeVore. Dr. Jan DeVore is on the slide at the very top on the right. She introduced me to my professional home, NASPA. She was my connector to Indiana University, where I got my first master's degree, and she has continued to be a part of my world for 27 years. I also met my best friend, who is at the bottom right, Hawate Tamrat, who is still in my life today. We've been walking this journey for a very long time together. My second swerve came when I met and married my husband, Tim, who was also a student affairs professional. I was actively seeking a job, not a relationship, but God had other plans. So Tim was and is an ambitious person who had career aspirations too. I trailed him to 2 institutions. So yes, I've been a trailing spouse, but my career continued to thrive. My third swerve occurred when I was an expectant mother. I went from an associate dean of students at one institution to a director role at another institution. I consciously chose to put my family first, both the baby that was growing inside me, as well as a mom and a dad who were both experiencing health difficulties at that time. I also took the opportunity to work for my mentor and sponsor, Dr. Janetta Cross-Brazell. She's in the center photo on the right-hand side. Dr. Janetta Cross-Brazell, or Dr. B as we call her, has been in my life for 20 years. She's been providing sage advice, asking tough questions, advocating, and nudging. She walked side by side with me as I worked with a search firm to land my first role as an executive at 38 years old. And she continues to be there for me, for the ups and downs, for the wisdom, for the, oh my gosh, I can't believe this just happened. My fourth swerve is in the educational pathways that I have chosen. I pursued an MBA when many around me were pushing the doctorate as necessary for next level leadership. In fact, it has worked very well for me. It has been critical to my journey. It has paid dividends that I could never have anticipated because of the kinds of issues that I've had to deal with in my work. I've had to navigate personnel cuts, budget challenges, budget reductions, project and program development and execution. In addition, I have my coaching certification, and that has been a wonderful tool in the higher education space because it's one thing to give advice and to mentor, it's another to coach your team to success. So if you've been keeping up, I've had 4 career swerves, I've worked at 8 institutions, and my professional career has been in higher education and student affairs for the last 27 years. I'm currently in my 2nd vice presidency as the first Black senior leader at Winthrop University in 132 years. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Now let's hear a little bit about my sister Belinda's journey.
Thank you, Sheila. And so I am excited to be able to share a little bit about my journey. Again, you learned a little bit about our family and our personal journeys to pursuing higher education. I think what Sheila omitted is that we received a message from a very young age that we would attend college. Had I known that college meant pursuing more education and really having to study and cram in the books, I might have passed on that. But there was a formula that was introduced into our lives at a very young age. And that formula was Christ plus education equals success. Remember, we are the products of being preachers' kids. Our mother was also a politician in the hometown where we grew up. And so our life was literally situated in a fishbowl. So to share a little bit about my personal journey, this is my 5th higher education institution that I've had the privilege of working at. I started at a small private institution in Rock Island, Illinois, but I want to talk about my journey before I actually entered the higher education arena. I am actually a successful law school dropout, is what I like to say. I think that when I graduated from undergraduate school, I took the LSAT and prepped, and I really thought that I wanted to be an attorney for juvenile delinquents. And quickly after entering law school and crying myself to sleep at night for over a year, I realized that that was not the calling for me. And so I did my first pivot, as I would say at that time. My sister calls it a swerve, I call it a pivot. And so I went to an institution called Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, where I was blessed to receive amazing mentorship from a woman by the name of Carmen Hoppenjohn, who believed in me when I was actually at a crossroads in my life or trying to figure out what my next would be, going from having aspirations of being an attorney, a civil rights attorney for juvenile delinquents, to try to navigate what is my next. And I had no clue, but didn't know how to ask for help, didn't know where to seek that help from. And so I was blessed to have people who surrounded me, who challenged me, and who also poured into me, even when I didn't know that I needed to be poured into. And so I worked at a small private institutions. I've also worked at very large public research institutions. I worked at one of the largest in the nation at the University of Central Florida for over 15 years. To walk you through a little bit of my slides, my path has not necessarily been as smooth as my sister's. I am a happily divorced woman, and I am now in my 2nd marriage, and I am blessed that I have a beautiful blended family. You will see the picture of my husband and I in the lower left-hand corner. His name is James. I call him JW. And so we kind of have an international family because we have family that live here and we have family that live abroad. I also have in the top right-hand corner my best friend, whose name is Marlene Jacks. We had the pleasure of meeting at Augustana College and have remained the best of friends for over 27 years. We've been there through the highs and lows together. We have pushed and supported and really built each other up when we needed that. And you will hear a little bit more about mentorship and needing to surround yourself with the right people in order to be successful in this journey. And the top right-hand corner is the only daughter that I was able to physically birth, which is my daughter Zahara, who is my pride and joy. And we will speak a little bit about our whys and why we choose to do this work. Where I get up every day and I come into this space because I want my family to have the life that we desire to have. But I also show up as a servant. I am here to serve this community. I don't come in with a hidden agenda. And I always remember that it is not about me, but it's about the people that I've been put to help work with together and help to move our institution forward together. I received my first executive position at the age of 35. It was an assistant vice president position at a very large institution. And there were lots of demons and voices that I had to learn to silence in my head. The voices of being too young, the voices of not having my PhD at the time, the voices of, do you have enough experience to actually sit at this table and add value to this table? I confess that I am a baby of student affairs, but my heart and my work has always been centered in the work of multicultural affairs or minority affairs or advocating for the voices through social justice work. You will see a lot of alphabet behind my name as well as my sister's name. I hold 2 bachelor's degrees, I hold 2 master's degrees, I hold numerous certifications, and I also hold a doctorate as well. And so we are, again, delighted to share a little bit about this journey. But I also want to point out the woman in the bottom right-hand corner, Dr. Mary Beth Haas, who has been a huge part of my life and continues to be a source of strength for me. I watched her as a woman in leadership at a table where there was no one else at the table that looked like her, small in stature, but very strong in her desires to succeed and very firm in her foundation of how she needed to be there to advocate for students. And so again, this is a little snapshot of my story. In the middle slide that you will see is with me and my bonus children. This is my family. We don't use the word step in our family because we are a family. We are united as one. We support each other, we challenge each other, we push each other, and we hold each other accountable.
So challenges are gifts that force us to a new center of gravity. Don't fight them, just find a new way to stand. Oprah Winfrey. So at this point, we want to talk a little bit about the intersections of identity that we bring to the workplace. And we won't recap the entire journey, but we think it's really important to start in this space when we talk about challenges, because we bring our whole selves to our leadership roles. While being a senior leader is really important in our lives, and as my sister just talked about, it's a service opportunity for us. It's an opportunity to serve both the institution that hired us, but also the people who look to us in leadership roles, as well as our students. And so we understand how important the work is. We also represent our families, our extended families, our ancestry, people from Malden, Missouri who invested in us. So we understand how important the role is, but we also wear a lot of different hats. In my first role as a Chief Student Affairs Officer, what became really salient for me, just like my sister, the fact that I was a Black woman, a young Black woman who had a young child, was pretty significant for me. She was 5 years old. My husband was still back in Arkansas at the University of Arkansas, wrapping up the selling of our home. And I was in Baltimore City. And I had this small child with me. It was just me and her. We knew maybe one or two other people in the city, but it was just us. So I was once chastised for choosing my sick child over a new employee reception with my peers. I was told that I made enough money to hire someone to care for my child. I had to quickly level set some things so that people understood that me being a mother was not a role that I could assign to anyone else. It was not how my values were built. I had to make sure they understood. When you got me during the interview process, I made it clear that my family was one of my #1 values. My husband was included in the interview process. They met my child during the interview process. So it was no surprise to anyone that I came with these people in this relationship with me. And so you may find yourself in situations where you have to level set for people. I have multiple roles, and I really am invested in my senior leadership role, but I also have these other people and these other things that are important to me. Another example that I would provide for you is my sister Belinda and I, and you might hear me call her Linda because that's who she is at home. We also have the responsibility of being the power of attorney for multiple people in our family. Multiple. Sometimes the list feels just a little too long. And so over the years, we've had to be responsible for the health and wellness of our mother and father and other people in our family. Over the last 10 years of my mother's life, we did some pretty heavy lifting in terms of managing her health. We did that while still becoming and still being in roles of senior leadership. We didn't drop the work that we had to do in our leadership roles, but we made it clear, again, that family was a really important part of what we're doing. So being daughters and caregivers has been central to the roles that we've played, not only on our campuses, but within our families. And we have been able to successfully intersperse those worlds. The other thing that I would say to you is that a major identity that we've had to navigate is being Black women in predominantly white spaces. It is not something that we always, at least I don't always think about it. Maybe my sister does, because really I'm too concentrated on doing the work that needs to be done. But I'm clear on this. Our very presence means that we are disruptors. We change the status quo by showing up. We are on full display at all times, especially when you're the first, only, different. Sometimes how you lead and execute is questioned, not because there's anything wrong, but because you are different. We bear the weight of having a seat at the table. At this level, you share the successes with your team, but you also take the weight of their mistakes that don't necessarily go well. You want to honor the position of power and privilege and perform well so that others like you will also have a chance and have a seat at the table as well. However, you often enter into places and spaces, conversations and experiences that weren't necessarily designed for you. For me, being the first Black senior leader in 132 years at Winthrop University wasn't actually something I was aware of until somebody made a donation in my name to a fund set up by the first Black women graduates of this institution. That shifted something within me when that letter came to me from our colleagues in advancement. This role was always important to me, but there was something about that experience that leveled it up for me. My Blackness has been very salient in this space. It's something that I carry with me. It's a badge of honor. It's not something that I shy away from, but it was just something unexpected at the time to be so salient in this role. But I have to say that I honor this position of power and privilege to be a first, to be an only, to be a different, or Shonda Rhimes might say, an FOD.
I will also say that it is really important that you not buy into the narrative that you have to be the strong woman or the strong Black woman in the space. You have to be honest with yourself, and you have to be willing to seek harmony. And notice I didn't say balance, I said harmony in your lives. And so you've heard my sister speak about the intersecting identities, and I am very clear that I walk into spaces as not just a woman, but a Black woman. We also want to point out the importance of navigating the realities of the incongruent expectations and political agendas that are all abound us today. Be clear that the role and responsibilities that you might read in a position description could vary when you actually are walking in the shoes or sitting in the seat. So it is so important that you stay true to who you are, that you understand the institution's agenda, you understand the expectations of your president, and that you remain flexible, that you actively listen so that you can seek to understand and not seek to respond, and be willing to ask those clarifying questions, yes, even if it annoys people, and also be willing to correct false narratives that may exist. It is so important as you are navigating the realities of the incongruent expectations that you teach people how to treat you, which means that if you allow people to speak down to you, to talk at you instead of talking to you, then you are creating the expectations for how your relationship will persevere or how it will move forward in the future. Next, it is so important, this is another challenge, that the role of being an executive officer is full of demands. And so it is so important that you pace the work that you are doing. And I am in my first vice president position, but I served as an assistant vice president for 15 years. And you would not think that that A on the front of the VP would make that big of a difference, but let me assure you, it does. There is only one VP that holds most of the positions on our campus. There's generally a chief financial officer, there's a chief executive officer, there's a dean of students, where there is only one vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion here at the University of Oklahoma. And so being at the executive table can be a lonely table. You're not always able to share all of the experiences that are happening around you with your team or even with your colleagues. And so it is so important that you pace yourself, be able to set priorities, and to constantly check to ensure that you are meeting expectations and that you are on track. Again, I've already stated that there's only generally one VP that holds certain identities, but it is also important to know that there are no set rules as we navigate these spaces. There is no manual that we can read. And in most cases, there's not even a transition binder that's been left for us. And so the environment is ever changing. It's a very fluid environment. And so it is so important that you always begin with the end in mind and ensure that you understand the vision and that you're willing to be a risk taker and that you are setting pace for the work that you are charged with leading. Soul. We put soul in leading with soul. Our souls is the sacred purpose within us, our deepest purpose, our unique meanings, the guiding force behind our individual lives.
So let's talk a little bit about leading with soul. The first thing I always say to people when we think about leading with soul is you need to remember your why. The thing that brought me into this profession was my desire to live an impactful life. We talked about how I left behind the glamorous life of being an anchor woman to be in the grind and the work of being a student affairs professional. I felt like I wanted to live this impactful life, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm here to help students to build their lives and futures beyond their wildest dreams. As a first-generation graduate, I've worked at institutions that have many first-generation college students. That has been a purposeful choice. When the work gets challenging, though, and sometimes it does, often it does, then it can feel like a grind. It can feel like the days are never going to end. Sometimes you go home crying to your partner, or you call up your mentor and you say, I think the whole world has lost their whole minds. You talk to your friends to say, what in the world? And I'm very fortunate to have a best friend who works in the profession as well. So sometimes I put on my walking shoes on a Sunday and she puts on hers, and we walk around the neighborhood waxing on about the madness of the world around us. But the thing that keeps us grounded and focused is the fact that there was something that brought you to this work. There was something that brought us to this work. So no matter how racially charged the realities get, and we know it's been racially charged over the last few years, no matter how much political drama there is, and there's always plenty, day in, day out, 365 days a year. The political realities of COVID and all that came with that on our college campuses, and all the other external pressures that impact our work. It is really important to stay centered on why you came to the work to begin with. Next, we think it's really important for you to think about who you work with. So my mentor, Dr. B, says to me over and over again, she reminds me so that I don't forget, it matters who you work for. It also matters where you work. Institutional values are there for a reason, but it does not mean that every institution out there walks out those values on a regular basis. Some people have mission drift. Some people get separated from the realities of their values when there's other political pressures that come to bear on the situation. And that's when institutions lose their way. And so when you're in the position of choosing, when you're going through an interview process, it is really important for you to get clear on the values of the institution and whether or not they align with who you are and how you want to do life. Because the reality is, my sister talked about this notion of balance. I talk about it in terms of energy management. There's a lot of energy that goes into doing these jobs, and we shift our energy back and forth from the other identities that we hold. But at the end of the day, we give a lot to these institutions. So when you are in a decision-making position and you have the authority to make a decision about where you want to connect, where you want to plug into, where you want to be in a leadership role, where you want to carry the institution's mission, vision, and values forward, then you need to make sure that there's alignment. It's also really important, I want to go back to that notion of who you work for. Institutions are institutions, and so there will be changes in leadership. You are always at choice. So just because the institutional leadership changes does not mean you have to stick around if you don't believe that there's alignment. I've been very fortunate to be at a number of institutions. Sometimes I feel unfortunate because I've changed supervisors at every institution that I've ever been at. I'm currently on my second president at my current institution. But the beauty that I get to experience in this role is that I have worked with two presidents at this institution who I have great respect for. They have great respect for me. We have values alignment. We have good, meaningful conversations. My presidents, both of them advocated for me. They trusted me. They trusted my experience and my expertise. And I think that's really important. So in case you didn't pick up on the underlying theme there, this notion of mutual respect is really important. It doesn't matter if you're brand new to your role like my sister is, or you're in your second role like I am, mutual respect cannot be replaced. So it's important that you look at those values as you enter into an institution.
And I will echo my sister's sentiment. Part of the reason I'm at the University of Oklahoma, it was the president that sealed the deal, who actually was the interim president when I entered into this space. But I felt that I could show up and be my authentic self with him. We were able to engage in some deep and meaningful conversations. And so that is the next point that we really want to highlight for you, is how you show up in various institutions. It is so important when you reach the executive table that you not try to put on airs and become someone that you are not. I call this keeping it real. So, my background is not in media relations, but I will say to you that it is important that you remember who you are and whose you are, and remember your why in everything that you do. Be comfortable in your own skin. Women are often interrogated around, specifically Black women, how we wear our hair, if our hair is in braids one day, if it's in a natural look one day, if we have a weave down our back one day. And so it is so important that you not get distracted by all of the background noise that will show up around you. Be comfortable in your own skin, remember who you are and what you know, and show up and do the work in the most authentic way that you can. Leading to our next point, centers squarely on communication. And so I'll let my sister start and then I'll jump in after that.
So communication is my jam, and sometimes it is my detriment because words matter, and I listen to what people say and how they say it and their word choices. And so communication for me is really important. And I try to lead with open, honest, consistent, and transparent communication. And in so doing, I also I use that to connect with people. And my communication, all that honesty and consistency and authenticity and transparency is laced with an ethic of care. An ethic of care. That piece is really important. The work that we do in higher education can be rewarding, but let's face it, it can also be difficult and grueling work. We know that people are here to do a job, but the degree to which they're committed to doing the job varies, because the reality is that they too bring their whole selves into the workplace, and sometimes they have other things pressing in on them. So I think it is really important, we think it is really important that you get to know your people. And your people aren't just the people who work beneath you or alongside you. They're the people who work up and the people who work around you and the communities that you impact. It's really important to connect at a genuine human level. Without connection, it'll be very difficult for you to advance the agenda of the institution, the agenda that you have been given responsibility for, because people can sense when you care more about the work than you care about the relationships and the people. It doesn't mean that you don't still have to deliver. You absolutely have to deliver, but people are much more likely to deliver when they feel cared for, when they feel like they're honored, when they feel like there's an ethic of care that surrounds everything you do. So we highly recommend, and we walk this out in our daily lives, that communication, authentic communication that is grounded in an ethic of care is very important. I'm going to let my sister talk a little bit about this, as well as employee engagement.
I will also say that it's important when communicating that you let your authentic voice shine through. We often have to craft messages for our campus community, and it is important that those messages are not centered in one identity, but they are inclusive messages. And so it is important when we do this work that if we feel like an authentic message is not going out, that we are willing to engage in those conversations around, no, that's actually the word I wanted to use, not this word. And it might seem petty, but we have a wide variety of individuals that we need to be able to connect with, internal to the institution as well as external. And so it is so important that we not be monotone in our approaches to how we do the work. The next thing that I really want to talk about is code switching. This is a topic that comes up a lot. Can you show up and be your authentic self? Do you have to leave your voice or pieces of you at the door? Let's have an open and honest conversation. It is important that you are aware of who your audience is, who your target audience is when you are speaking to them. But it does not mean that you have to leave who you are at the door. But it is important that you know your audience and that you adapt and adjust your message to connect with the audience that you are trying to connect to. I would not necessarily use the same language in the boardroom that I would meeting with a group of students. And so yes, code switching is a part of having an executive presence and navigating the institution. The next thing that I want to talk about, as a licensed mental health clinician, it is so important that we give people permission to show up and be human in these jobs. Allow them to know that they can make a mistake, but it is so important that there is a quick recovery and that they recover forward. And so I believe that universities have to create a space for reconciliation and redemption, but first you have to own your mistakes and you have to be willing to say, yes, I screwed that up. And often, people feel like there's not a space for that. But with employee engagement, nobody is going to think and act and do exactly what you want them to do. And so part of employee engagement is really connecting with your employees and remembering that everyone is showing up in this space with different lived experiences. Not everyone experiences the university the same. Not everyone experiences the community the same. Not everyone experiences America the same. And so when we begin to center one identity, it is very, very dangerous. So with this employee engagement piece, you have to connect with your people on an individual level. And yes, we have work to get done. And yes, we have to achieve, and we need to meet the goals and demands of the work. But people want to know that you care before they want to know what you care about. Next is those inclusive perspectives and being open to all of the possibilities. Go ahead, Sheila.
So sometimes in collegiate environments, there is some serious black and white thinking, some all or nothing thinking. It reads as rigid and it rarely leads to success. And so you've already heard her talk about this notion of an inclusive perspective. And so when I talk with my staff and when I talk with the people around me and my colleagues, I often will use these words. Can we figure out a way to get to yes? Because so often people don't realize as they put up all the roadblocks and the reasons for why you cannot accomplish something, or why we don't do that this way here, or why that might not land well there, then it sounds like you don't want to do something, or that you're blocking, or that you don't want to move forward or be progressive. And so the approach that Belinda and I take in our work is really thinking about yes and is my phraseology, and hers is it's this and that. They both mean the same thing. We are looking for win-win situations. We're looking for opportunities to get to yes, and not just for the sake of winning, because some people just want to win just for the sake of winning. When we're at the table advocating for something, we're advocating for it because we see a perceived need. We've assessed a perceived need. We've gotten some notion from someone that we need to be advocating for something in particular. We recognize that there's a voice that's not being included in the conversation, or we know that despite everything we believe about how something might land, we have intel that tells us otherwise. If you do it this way, then this is how that's going to land. And so where possible, we like to be inclusive in our perspectives. We believe in possibility. We believe that you can get there as long as you approach the situation with an open attitude, thinking about things in terms of opportunity and possibility and win-win for everyone, as opposed to this is my agenda and this is what I need to get done. And so again, we think that that has served us well. Here's a great example that I will give you because it's starting to feel a little like a lecture. So we had a situation on our campus recently. As you know, many institutions are dealing with budget cuts, and budget reductions are a very real thing. We have a programming group on campus that wanted to do something called Drag Woo. And Drag Woo is an 8-year tradition of doing a drag show on the campus. This is an important event for our students in a lot of ways. It really highlights and brings to the forefront many of the identities that exist on this campus. However, the budget that was associated with this particular contract was pretty intense to a degree that I thought this might be a problem. And so instead of saying an outright no to them, I did some coaching around, here's what you might need to do in order for us to get this over the hump. I need you to go out and seek sponsorships and think about how we can be collaborative in this programming effort so that the actual dollars that are coming out of this individual budget are not as intense. And then on the other side of that, I went and had a conversation with the president about all the reasons why it was important for this event to go forward. And the beauty of it was, when you work with reasonable people who understand their population, who are plugged into why things are important, then it's pretty easy to get to yes. They came up with the sponsorships, which brought down their commitment to about half of what it would be. The president signed off on us moving forward with this, and the advocacy was where it needed to be, and this event went off flawlessly. It was a beautifully done event, and everybody felt included and welcomed, and an 8-year tradition was allowed to continue, even though we were still being mindful of the constraints and the political realities of what might happen if it got out in the atmosphere that this was such a huge contract. So we managed that in a way that I think beautifully centered what was most important, but also kept an eye on the inclusive perspective of what the institution and the institutional stakeholders might be looking at.
And I think that's an excellent example that Sheila just provided around inclusive perspectives. Notice that she did not use the word right or wrong, which instantly creates a power differentiation. We know that as executive officers, we hold a level of power. We are perceived as being a part of the up group, and at times we are a part of the down group. But it's so important that we try to find a neutral ground that we can be on to get to a positive conclusion for all. I want to move us forward to how we define success. And I think that it is so important for all of the participants to remember that we encourage you to determine success for yourself. Don't allow other people to give you a scientific definition of what success should look like and how it should materialize itself in your life. No one person's journey is the same. They are individual journeys. And so you need to have your own working definition of what it means to be successful. So we're going to move into the next part of this presentation, which we really think is some of the meat and potatoes of this if you're a meat and potato eater, or some of those firm root vegetables if you're a vegetarian that helps to sustain you throughout the day. We think that there are some keys that we have identified that have helped us to be successful in our roles. And so the first thing we want to speak about is mission-driven work. We were each hired into a position to fulfill a role and to help move the university forward. It is so important that you are aware of what the strategic plan and strategic initiatives are for your institution. Most people only look at the strategic plan, or they look at the mission statement or the vision statement when they are interviewing to be a part of the fabric of that institution. They pick it up, memorize it for the interview, and then they never revisit those documents. They memorialize them somewhere. It is so important that those are living, breathing documents that are a part of you as a leader, because we've been hired to fulfill the mission of the university. And so if you are showing up in a space and not fulfilling the mission and have been derailed by all of the things and all of the distractions that occur in the environment, then you are setting yourself up for a pitfall, which we will talk about later in our presentation. But again, keep in mind the strategic mission, vision, goals, and purpose of your institution. And that may change. And you may be in one iteration, you may have a leadership change, and there is a new iteration. At the University of Oklahoma, we have a new strategic plan, a new living document that we lean into to help guide our work and what we are expected to deliver on our campus. Not everyone is excited about the strategic plan, because this is the first strategic plan we've had in 30 years. And so we've had to manage some spoken expectations, some unspoken expectations. We've had to manage positive attitudes and otherwise attitudes around this. But the goal is we have to keep driving the mission and moving the university forward. Next, we can speak about student success. Sheila, would you like to jump in on that one?
So as we talk about this notion of being mission driven, my mission on this campus is student success. My sister's is as well. Hers is slightly more focused, mine is more broad. And by student success, I mean student safety, security, risk mitigation, services, support, retention, graduation, all in an environment of inclusive excellence. And so student success is the guidepost for my world, but that guidepost it's centered around the strategic plan, mission, vision, goals of the institution. I don't exist on an island. I exist in relationship to the institution's strategic priorities. And so there can be things that happen in your world, and she said these words without even knowing I had these words on my document. There can be things and situations and events that can derail you from the mission of the institution. Sometimes it's noise in the communication chain. Sometimes it's a loud voice that's out in social media, making it look like no one at the institution is being successful. It can be any number of things that can derail you. I would say that COVID is one of the most major disruptions that many of us have experienced on our campuses. And it has really put us in danger of not remembering why we exist and what we're supposed to be doing. And so what I have consistently said to my staff, no matter how tough it gets, and it gets tough sometimes, our mission has not changed. We are still here to be in the business of student success. the role that you occupy within the organization, I still expect you to bring your expertise to the table and bring it to bear on the situations that are before us. It might mean that someone in a higher level position than you will make a decision that is not in alignment with what the recommendation was that you made. That means when the decision is made, you realign what you need to do to still deliver on student success and student safety and risk mitigation and the services that you're responsible for. So in case you're not getting it, let me say it again. It's really important to be aligned with the mission of the institution. It will lead you to success every time. It is a guidepost. It is a compass. Make sure you stay plugged into it.
I think a few other things to mention under mission driven before we move to our next point is to really make sure you understand the vision for your board of regents or trustees or for your president. That has to be a constant communication chain and a communication loop where you're constantly checking in and having those conversations. And the last thing that I will say under the mission driven bullet is that it is so important that we remember that we are cultivating a sense of belonging for all of our faculty, staff, students, and key stakeholders who are on our campus. If we don't have students, then we are not fulfilling the mission of the university. So it has to be students first. They have to be at the heart of everything that we do. And yes, we need profound faculty to lead research agendas, but if they don't have anyone to teach, then we cannot be successful. The next bullet that I want to move us to in lieu of time is cultivating and actively maintaining relationships. It is so important that we know the relationships that we cannot be successful without having great relationships. None of us work in isolation. And I often say to my team, it is so important that we're able to literally navigate up, down, and across the organization, and even outside of the organization in some respects. And so it's important that as executive leaders that we get out of our offices, that we meet people where they are, that we have those coffee meetings, take a lunch meeting, and we maintain those human connections. It's also important to remember who your first team is. And I think oftentimes as executive leaders, we think that our first team are the people who report up to us. Well, actually, your first team are the people that you sit at the executive table with. And so you have to know and understand the difference between that. At the executive table, there are different layers of responsibilities, but my loyalty is to this team that I am a part of, making sure that we are a united front and that we lead our university together with the highest level of integrity. And so again, understanding who your first team is critically important in maintaining and cultivating relationships.
So another critical piece of maintaining relationships and cultivating relationships is being open to feedback, criticism, constructive, destructive, all of it. Now, let me level set that for you. So you're going to receive feedback from a variety of stakeholders. Some of it will be solicited. A lot of it will be unsolicited. Some of it will be wanted. A lot of it will be unwanted. But you need to be open to it because typically there's probably some nugget in there that you can take something from. It also has a lot to do with how you show up in the leadership space. If you show up as someone who is defensive about feedback, other people's ideas, other people's opinions about how things should be, that is going to set you up for failure in a major way. You need to remain in an open posture of being willing to hear and to consider what other people have to offer, because the reality is sometimes people have really amazing ideas. Sometimes they need to think about how they deliver it differently. But if you're able to listen and listen at what undergirds a suggestion, then you may be able to walk away with something that's very useful. But I'll also say this about feedback. It is useful to think about feedback like a gift. Some gifts are wonderful. You want to keep them, embrace them, utilize them on a regular basis. Some gifts you want to re-gift to others or just get rid of. So I'm saying to you, it doesn't matter that they know what you're going to do with the gift that you've been given, unless it's important that you demonstrate in a visible way that you're activating that feedback because it's important feedback. It's important that you be open to receiving it. And that is very much based in this notion of emotional intelligence, which is what we're going to have a conversation about now.
I think emotional intelligence, some people call it IQ or EQ, some people call it EI. However you've heard it introduced to you, it is important in an executive officer role or in any leadership role that you be aware of how you are showing up emotionally in this space. You cannot show up and your emotions not be in check. It is so important that we respond versus reacting to feedback that we receive or some of the background noise. I call it background noise. Sheila referred to it as the gift that you can re-gift, right? However you choose to center that in your world, just know that you need to be willing, you have to be willing to focus on the response and not the reaction or that gut feeling that you might have initially. Also, it is so important to focus on the facts, not feelings. People's feelings will take you down all types of paths in this work. And yes, we have to create a space where we listen to how people feel and we allow them to interrogate their own emotions, but our work has to be driven by the facts and by the data. You have to also make sure that if something has happened and it catches you off guard, that you create those verbal pauses or take those time to reflect, create a moment of reflection for yourself so that you don't enter a space overreacting, misspeaking, not showing up in a professional way. So it's so important to create that pause and to make sure that you are displaying high levels of emotional intelligence. There can be nothing that derails you more than to show up, and I call it being a hot mess all over the place all the time. People will be afraid of, oh, are they gonna act crazy today? Your reputation will be there long before you enter the space. And sometimes our reputations come from how we react in certain situations, especially when it's a stressful situation.
And what I would add to that before I move us forward is sometimes that shows up in your face, in your body language, and not in your words. And so emotional intelligence and emotional EQ shows up in the fullness of how you communicate, because your mouth could be saying all the right things, but your demeanor and the energy that you're giving off and the nonverbals could be really delivering a different message. And so you need to make sure that there's alignment between what you're verbally saying and what the energy that your body is giving off in terms of your nonverbal communication. Another piece of this is being solution focused versus problem focused. Solution focused people solve problems through interventions, strategies, innovations. Problem focused people are really good at identifying the problems. And to an extreme, they may be only able to see the problems, but they never offer any solutions. At the leadership table, most of us already know what the problems are. So we don't need you to go on a soliloquy or a monologue about what all the problems are. What we need at the leadership table is if you're able to identify an issue, then you're also able to identify a solution or multiple solutions for consideration in terms of how to address an issue. That will give you great respect within your senior leadership team. It'll give you great respect within the people who report to you to be able to come to the table with solutions as opposed to just offering problems. So the other thing I want to talk about is understanding the context before providing content. There's a lot of things that come at you on a regular basis. Sometimes you get a phone call. I've gotten a phone call before from a president. He left me a message and he asked me to call him ASAP. When I tell you, but there was intensity in the tone. And he called me personally. It was not his administrative assistant, it was him. And it was a voicemail. And this is at the time when I was commuting in the city of Baltimore. I had no clue what this call might be about, but this is not somebody who called me on a regular basis. So I had to quickly think to myself, what do I need to do to get a handle on what this might be about, even if I don't know for sure? So while I was in that car, I hit the Bluetooth and I triaged that situation. I called my dean of students. I called people in major leadership roles in my division and a couple of colleagues outside of the division, and didn't give away too much, but just wanted to understand were there any things that hit the radar, anything that showed up in a police report that I needed to be aware of. And the reason why I give you that example is so that you understand that it's really important that when you show up to the table, when you've been summoned, that you need to think about the political, social, institutional implications of whatever response you're about to deliver in relation to the thing that you've been told. I try to understand what I'm hearing. I try to suspend judgment. I try to temperature check myself, very much some of the things my sister just talked about. And the opinion that I ultimately share may not be popular, but it is in alignment with what I know my knowledge base, my experience, the information that I've gathered. It is not based in some emotional space, and it's well considered and steeped in wisdom. And that's where you need to be in order for people to continue to trust your opinions. So let's go on and talk about culture shapers and change
And I want to do
makers.
a time check. We probably have about 10 minutes to finish up our full presentation. So I think when we speak about being a culture shaper and a change maker, you are brought in to move the university forward. You've heard us say this numerous times. So it is important that you are doing environmental scans, that you are listening to your constituents, and that you are coalescing all of the voices that are a part of that community so that you can make sure that you're being responsive and that you're in touch with the current issues of the day. I always say that in order to shape culture, you have to demonstrate wins. So you need to go for quick wins, look for what I call that low-hanging fruit to show that you listened and that you are working to be responsive in an immediate and applicable way. Also be willing to share a vision and onboard people into that vision. Notice we're not speaking about buying in to a vision, because the vision is set by the university, by the Board of Regents, by strategic documents. And so it's important that we get everyone on board and also be visible in various spaces throughout your institution to show your commitment to all of the constituents that you are responsible for.
So next, we're going to be talking about why it's important to go beyond just being average. It's important to bring your best to almost any situation that you're in. So we have talked a lot about everything else. But one of the things that we haven't really hunkered down on is this notion of doing excellent work. So you have been brought to an institution to work. You are here to meet goals and expectations, move the needle, deliver outcomes. You are there to make an impact, not just for your sake, but for the sake of all the people who count on you to do your important work. So don't forget to produce. Don't get so caught up in the beauty of being a vice president or all the fun things that you might get to do as a vice president and not actually focus on the work. We should role model a strong work ethic and productivity. There should never be a question about whether or not you are delivering on the things that you have been hired to deliver.
Also be intentional about raising the institution's profile. It is so important that your institution is known locally, regionally, nationally. And so you have to set time in your schedule to go after the awards, to do the press releases, to seek the accolades for your organizations. And yes, it is an additional thing that is not in your job description that you are expected to do, but you need to go after those grants, go after those awards, go after that regional recognition. You need memberships outside of your institution. Sheila spoke about NASPA being her home. I'm a member of NASPA. I'm also a member of NCOR, of the ACE, other professional organizations, because you need a network internal to your institution as well as external to your institution.
And what I would also say, in addition to being members of all of those places, you need to take on some leadership responsibility. I have chaired national committees and boards. I have been a part of national institutes, leading them and being a part of them and taking advantage of them. I've been faculty members, so has she. And so again, as she so eloquently stated, it is not always built into your job description that you should do these things, but they're beneficial for both you and your institution because it elevates you and it elevates the institution and it gives you an opportunity to contribute to a profession that's given so much to you. The last thing is really making sure that you have a life outside of the institution that connects you to the work that you do at the institution. And not all of it has to connect, but there are some critical connection points. It is how you maximize the energy that you have in the limited amount of time that you have, whether it's in your spiritual communities, the association boards that you choose to be a part of. Make sure that you are maximizing your time because you are one person and you cannot do it all. So when you think about how you spend that limited window of time that you have, if there's a way to manage a couple of things with one involvement, then do that. For the PETA folks, I made sure not to say kill two birds with one stone. See, you have to have some levity too. And then the last piece of this
is really to make sure you remain relevant and understand the community needs. The University of Oklahoma is situated in 3 different communities, and all of those communities have different needs. And so make sure that you're out and about and visible in all of those spaces so that when a crisis does emerge, you have a phone number that you can call to connect with someone quickly to come up with a solution or to offer up different perspectives on things. We're going to move forward, and we're almost done with this presentation. We're going to get to our Q&A, which is the most exciting part of this. Is we want to talk with you a little bit about pitfalls to avoid. And these are lessons that we have learned along the way.
So one of the first things is inadequate boundary setting. You have got to set some boundaries. Remember to be mindful of the scope and sphere of your influence. When you sit at this level, people will try to pull you into everything and nothing, as in things that have nothing to do with what you are brought there to do, but they still want you to be a part of it. So you really need to figure out how to manage those pieces. For me, part of that process is making sure to have a strong partner in progress. That is what I call administrative support. Make sure that your administrative support is your gatekeeper and a true partner, that they're operating with an ethic of care, that they're looking out for you, making sure that your time is appropriately spent, and screening time for your screening requests for your time. It's important that they not just lump everything and everybody onto your schedule. There has to be some triaging of what shows up there. You have other people on your team. This work can be dispersed to other people. So make sure that they're not piling it all on you.
I would also say that a pitfall is not being attentive to self-care. Both my sister and I navigate health issues as we go through this space. And so if we are not managing our energy well, the first place that it shows up is in our bodies. And so it is important that you have self-care, and that cannot be something that you pick up and put down. You also have to manage your energy. And there are things that you need to do for self-preservation. You need to eat, you need to sleep, you need a restroom break. So don't be afraid to say no. And as my sister was talking about having a partner in progress, she will say to me, did you go to the restroom? Did you eat lunch today? And so I so appreciate those check-ins throughout the day to make sure that I am taking care of self so that I can continue to show up and lead in this space. And don't let people make you feel guilty about your no. People pleasing is a huge pitfall. And saying no is a complete sentence. It does not deserve an explanation. There are other people who can represent you in certain spaces. And so be willing to let them do that. The next thing that I will say is a huge pitfall is not creating a community of support around you. My sister calls it a mentor or accountability partners. I call it a posse. You need a group of people that you can go to just to have a sip of coffee, to go on a walk, or for them to say, girl, you need to get your life. You need people who will tell you the truth, no matter how difficult it is to hear it. And so make sure that you surround yourself with people who are not always taking from you, but are willing to pour into you, because we really need that. And oftentimes we're letting people make emotional withdrawals every day, and nobody is making any deposits throughout the day. And it is important that we have that.
And what I will add to that as I move us on to the next topic is sometimes those people are outside of your institution. It's beautiful if you find somebody on the campus who you can have those conversations with in a safe way. But often they're outside of the institution because there are some issues that you need to discuss, that you need to talk about with your executive coach, or you need to have a conversation with your mentor, or maybe you need to talk with your therapist about it. So get you a support system, paid, unpaid, in person, long distance, virtual, whatever that needs to be. Make sure that you get some people who are looking out for you, who are helping to take care of you. The next thing is, don't take your executive presence home. So there's a persona that you need at work that isn't needed at home. It's okay to relax, relate, release. You don't need to be leading everything at home. It's okay to ask for help and then take it. And I can tell you, it can be hard to make the switch. And these days, because I'm 6 minutes from home instead of 45 minutes from home, I have to mentally make the shift before I walk out this door and get into my car. I'm not always successful at it. Sometimes my husband will say to me, did you seriously just put me through a serious question and answer just now? It's almost like an interrogation, because when I'm talking with staff, I try not to be an interrogator, but I have about 6 or 7 questions about the things that you just said to me. So I'm learning. And I'm not perfect at it, but I'm learning to make those shifts on a regular basis. So please don't take your executive presence home. It's not needed there. And the last piece of this, And my sister insisted that this one be here. It's important that if you are not enjoying the journey, you might need to reconsider the journey. This work is hard. It is time intensive. It takes a lot out of you. So it's really important that there is something that is feeding your soul, that has you coming back to work every day. There should be moments of joy every day. And I know that's weird to hear, but I have moments of joy every day. It doesn't mean that it was all day long. It doesn't mean it was for the 10 or 12 hours that I was here, but there's something every day that continues to bring me joy, even when it's been a really hard and tough day. And the moment that that ceases to be the case, then I'm going to plant my seeds elsewhere, because it's going to be important to keep myself in a place where I can feel like I'm producing from a place of joy and not from a place of stress and anger and victim energy.
And I want you to notice that she didn't say happy, she said joy, because joy is a form of strength. Again, going back to our backgrounds of how we were raised and how we center ourselves. And so I think we will leave you with this final quote, and then we're going to turn it back over to Dr. Orongu to open up the question and answer. We are so excited to say that our 92-year-old grandmother is still 93, is still present and active in our lives. And so we know that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, because we are able to show up in these spaces as our authentic selves, to share a little bit about our stories and our journeys of how we got from there to here, and knowing that this is a journey of 1,000 steps. It is not a destination, because every day you will learn something new. So we thank you today for taking time to hear a little bit about our personal journeys, and we're going to turn the floor back over to Dr. Orongu for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Hyppolite and Sheila Burkhalter. This is amazing. I hope that you will get time to read the chat. We'll save the chat for you.
Please, thank you.
That you can see what Fox was saying during the presentation. I'll forward that to you. So this was amazing. It felt like it's a coaching session, it's a mentoring session, it's a support session. So somebody even say, oh, we need to have this at the Anchor conference for, for a whole day, probably. So I have several questions here, and because of time, I'll go right into them and try to combine. And my first question goes to Sheila. You mentioned about, sometimes you forget that you're a Black woman in that environment. And given that is part of your identity, we have somebody who is asking, so how then do you navigate that? That is an identity marker for you. And sometimes there is a way that Black women in leadership are viewed, combining that to bring your authentic self. Mm-hmm. Do you find that sometimes folks will judge you in the space because maybe you are not coming out as authentic, or they don't think what you're doing is authentic? What does authentic mean here? Because sometimes Black women have been referred as loud instead of passionate, angry instead of, being firm.
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. And when I say that I forget that I'm Black, I wake up every morning, I see a Black woman in the mirror. So it's not that. I think when I reference forgetting that I'm Black, I don't forget that I'm actually Black. It's about what's a salient identity at the time. And so sometimes a salient identity for me is I'm a first generation college student. And so if I find myself in a space and they're talking about things, or they're using terminology that I might not be familiar with, then the identity that pops up for me that is salient in that moment is the fact that I'm first generation. It's not that I divorce myself from my Blackness. That's not what's happening. There are times when the salient identity is motherhood. When I'm headed to campus to be at a parent-teacher conference, yes, I'm a Black woman showing up in that space. I'm a vice president for student affairs showing up in that space. But in that moment, I'm somebody's mama showing up in that space and wanting to be there in the fullness of my motherhood. I'm a Black mother, but I don't enter that space going, I'm a Black mother, unless again, there's something in that moment that makes me go, okay, I need to point out to people that this thing that's happening right now is unacceptable because there's something in it that has tweaked me and that lens of Blackness that I bring to the table. So again, I'm not divorcing my identities. I show up fully authentic, and I know that I'm a Black woman, but I don't necessarily sit around every day going, oh, I'm not filtering on a constant basis of, what does this mean for me as a Black woman? I'm thinking about the fullness of my role and what I bring to it, and showing up as my authentic self. And the Blackness happens to be the thing that undergirds everything that I do. So it's not a separation. It's not a forgetting. I am fully authentic. I'm probably one of the most authentic people that you will ever meet. It's too difficult for me to be anything other than that. Because it's hard work to pretend to be somebody other than I am. When I sit in a room, when I'm on a screen like I was today and we were having cabinet, it is clear to me I am the only Black person sitting in that space. So I'm aware of it. It's not necessarily driving the conversation when I open my mouth to say, here's what we need to be thinking about as it relates to the residence hall. They see it, they know who I am, but if it comes up, I won't hesitate to bring up something that needs to be brought out in that moment. Does that answer the question for you?
It does, I'm sure, for me and for the person who had asked it, and reminded that both of you say, just show up. Even showing up is a disruption in itself. This question is for Dr. Hyppolite. You are very passionate about mission, university mission, being driven by specific goals. But we do have somebody asking, what happens when a university has a mission, it's out there, but what's going on in its systems and practices does not align with that mission? So how do you as an executive try to create change in these spaces? Because change has to include everyone, and especially the role as a chief diversity officer.
Jane, thank you so much for that question. I think that it is very important. And part of the way that I am able to make sure that we're holding true to what, I think that it's one thing to have words on a piece of paper. I think it's another thing to actually breathe life into those words and make sure that that is how we show up as executive officers. And so I think this is why it is so important that as a Black woman, I'm at the executive table and that I'm bringing in a different lived experience and a different perspective, because I think oftentimes when conversations are happening behind closed doors in executive spaces, there are certain things that do get centered in that space. And so it is so important that we make sure that we're thinking about all of the individuals who are part of our campus community, our international students, our students who come from rural versus urban versus, single parent homes versus folks who are fifth generation versus folks who are first generation. And so I do think that if I notice that something is out of alignment, I begin with one-on-one conversations first, right? And I will say, so this came up in a meeting and I'm not really certain, and I go to the author of that information. So if someone is introducing something into the space that was a surprise, I don't think that, I think time, place, and discernment of when you need to have those conversations are important. So you start with those one-on-one conversations. And this is where having those authentic relationships really matter. At this table, you have to be willing and able to have confrontational conversations, critical conversations, and hard and difficult conversations. And so being able to do that in a one-on-one setting, and if you haven't been successful in that setting, to bring it up in a larger setting as well, to say, well, this is who we say we are, but this is the messaging that we're sending out, or this is how we are being perceived by these various audiences. And so always keeping in front of us, again, that beginning with the end in mind, who we say we are and who we want to be. And when we find that there are things in the environment that are out of alignment, we have to be willing to challenge it. We have to be willing to have those difficult conversations and to be the disruptors and to call out bad actors, bad agenda, those hidden agendas that sometimes come into the space. And I think that people enter in with honorable intentions, but I often say intent does not always equal impact. You may not intend to offend me. It doesn't mean that you didn't offend me, right? And so it's being able to reconcile that. And so that's why it's so important that you have people like myself and my sister at executive tables, because again, as we said earlier, we automatically show up as disruptors in this space because we bring in a different lived experience through a different lived lens and all of those things. And so all of those salient identities and lived experiences help to bring a different perspective to the table.
Thank you. I want to ask Sheila to stop sharing the screen so that everybody can see your beautiful faces. So this question is for either of you. When you shared about your journey, you are in executive positions at a very early age. And at that point, I'm sure Sheila did not have her MBA and plus all these other degrees, and Belinda did not have her doctorate. And somebody is asking, you know, in the academy, these many letters behind our names seem to mean something to some people. And sometimes you are not accorded, let's say, the privilege of being in an executive position because you don't have, you know, a high level degree. So how can you prove, the person is asking, how can you prove you are ready to move to the next level? How did you all get there, even though the top degree was not in place at that time?
So what I will say, and then I'll hand off to her, I had just gotten my MBA right before I landed in my first executive position. And so that, I'm sure, was a catalyst for it. But I will also say that sometimes people are waiting until they arrive to show up as an executive. You have an opportunity to show up as an executive no matter what level of position you're in. So when I was a director of first year experience, which was a career swerve from an associate dean at another institution, I still showed up in my executive presence. I had on my suits every day. I talked like an executive. I was well read. I challenged like an executive. I really showed up in that space as if I was an executive, because at an Alice Mannlicher symposium with some really powerful women, they said, don't wait to be an executive, show up as an executive, and then people will begin to see you as that executive. And so by the time I showed up for that first executive interview, first people were shocked because they're like, how old is this person? I look pretty young. I'll be 50 next year, but I still look pretty young. And so people are thrown off by that. But then they said, they shared this with me, the executive committee, the executive search firm shared this with me. They said, you blew everyone else out of the water in terms of how you showed up, the energy that you brought, the answers that you gave, the way you addressed the questions, the kind of situations that you brought to bear in terms of the examples that you gave. And so don't wait for the invitation. Show up wherever you are in that right now. Don't let the people around you dictate what that needs to look like. I showed up in this environment and there were people in a suit on my first day of work, and y'all, it is hot in South Carolina and nobody else was wearing a suit. And somebody said to me, oh, we don't wear suits here. You need to, dress more casually. I said, at my level, the seat that I occupy on the bus, the suit is the uniform. So I'll be in this every day, and you need to get accustomed to seeing it. And if you want to be taken a little more seriously, you might consider adopting a different way of showing up. And so again, it's one of those things where you have to define success for yourself. And part of what got you here is what keeps you here. And so show up in the space as if you're already an executive.
And I will piggyback on that. I think what got you here will keep you here, but also what got you here will not necessarily get you there. Right. And so I think that there are people who are kind of stuck in mid-management positions or lower management positions, and you're trying to figure out, why can I move and ascend? And I think that, my father used to say all the time, be careful of the company that you keep. Right. There are people who will be a part of your life because they're looking to get something from you. There will be people who will be a part of your life because they're looking to pour something into you. There will be people who will open doors for you. There will be people who will create seats at the table for you. And then there will be people who will do all of the above. And so I will say that, the first thing that I say is, don't embarrass the family. You have to always be aware of how you're showing up on your campus community, because your reputation will be there long before you get there. People will have these talking points about your demeanor, about your attitude, if you're solution-based versus if you're the social justice warrior, where you're always pointing out all of the problems, but you're never in the advocacy role, helping to create some of the solutions. And so my sister called it executive presence. That is the word that I also use as well. Your leadership presence matters. We know that higher education is a very small arena. And if you have a bad experience at one institution, it is easy for that bad experience to follow you to every other institution. So I would say safeguard your reputation. Again, this is about beginning with the end in mind. Where is it you aspire to be? Who is currently in those roles? And how can you begin to shadow, to get information, to watch what they are doing? I remember when I got to the University of Central Florida, I was in an assistant director position. I actually took a pay cut, and I took a position cut to go to that institution. And the first time I had the opportunity to meet the vice president, she says, "What is it you want to do one day?" And I said, "I want your job." And I didn't laugh. She kind of chuckled. And I didn't, because I wanted her to know that I was 100% serious. And because I shared that information with her, she began to create opportunities for me. Why don't you join me in this meeting? Why don't you do this presentation to the president's cabinet? And so again, it's about surrounding yourself with the right people. If you are the smartest person in your circle, get a different circle or expand your circle, because you need to be challenged and you need to constantly be challenging yourself to grow and to learn more so that you can be successful on your terms.
You know, unfortunately, we have ran out of time, but I'm going to take 1 minute for each of you. Give us your best line as an executive and as a coach for somebody out there who is saying, "I want your job."
Good.
I need a second on this one.
Yeah.
So here's what I would say. You have to be fully committed to this work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do your homework. You need to be well read. You need to be investing in those relationships. You need to be attending conferences. You need to not be afraid of hard work. You need to remember where you come from, your value system, and all the things that really we talked about in this presentation. This is hard work. Do not be confused about the fact that being an executive is hard work, and sometimes it feels like it's never ending work. But if you approach it, not just because you want to be in a position of authority and you want a big title, we approach this work because we want to live passion-filled, purposeful lives. We want to make a difference for other people. And so when the title falls away, and our titles have been different, and we've both gone from high titles back to low titles, up to higher titles again. But what has been consistent is our willingness to have impact and to move the needle and to make the places and spaces that we've occupied better for us having been there and for the people who are going to occupy those spaces long after we're gone. So that's the advice that I would give.
And I would say, to add on to what she's saying, in addition to hard work, do smart and meaningful work. Sometimes you don't have to work hard if you do your research and figure out what has worked in the past and what some of the mistakes have been. And so not only working hard, but working smart. I will say that it is so important to stay humble. You are a person that has been given a title, but that title does not determine who you are. So I was Belinda long before I was Belinda, the vice president. So you have to stay humbled. Again, you have to be willing to make mistakes and fall forward. Failure is an event, not a person. I've had many failures in my life, but because of all of those failures, I am better for it today. And also be willing to meet people where they are. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself. And I often say, don't tell yourself no before you get there. Let other people tell you no. It's always a yes for me, unless you tell me no. And even when you tell me no, I don't necessarily think it's a no. I'm like, well, let's see if there's another way to get into the space. So I think that you have to have that level of resiliency and persistence as well.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Hyppolite and Sheila Burkhalter. I did not even get to half of the questions. So
Send them to us.
There were many more questions that were in the chat that I never got to, but that tells you that this was a very, very good presentation. And we are so, so very much thankful at Anchor for the time and for your expertise. And I want to remind everybody that Dr. Hyppolite and Sheila Higgs Hyppolite, not Hyppolite, but Burkhalter. I'm sorry, this is what happens when you're sisters.
It's okay.
They are not only vice presidents, but they are also executive coaches. So if you want a one-on-one with them, when we send out that PowerPoint, their email is there. Dr. Hyppolite is at the University of Oklahoma. Sheila Higgs Burkhalter is at Winthrop. You can always find their contacts there. Invite them for a presentation. Somebody said this is a master class. Yes, it is. So invite them. If you're a young professional, remember you can do it. They did it at 30-something, and they are continuing to impact higher education institutions. I want to thank everybody for joining. Please drop a thank you there. They will both be able to read from the chat. I also saw familiar names in there. Thank you for coming. I saw family members, the Higgs family there, Burkhalter family was there. So thank you also very much for joining this presentation. I want to thank our ASL team from Sorenson, Jeff and Lisa, and Ed. I want to thank my team, Stephanie, Corey, Kathy, and everybody at the Southwest Center. So from the University of Oklahoma in Norman, this is Jenny Rongo signing off, and thanking you all so very much, and hoping that we'll reconnect in our next webinar. Thank you all so very much. And thank you again, Sheila and Belinda. We are very grateful. This was good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane.
It's going to be available 5 to 7 days from now. It's going to be posted on our website. It is university material now, and it's going to be available for you to utilize on demand. And I hope that you can go back and listen to it. Thank you so much.